right. Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Miklich calling from Long Island, the heart of the COVID attack. Today I'll be speaking about Joe Sprague, perhaps the best pitcher of the 1860s nobody knew. But before I do that, I have to explain what is commonly known as the best pitcher and his accomplishments, which is certainly everybody should know here, is Jim Crichton of the Brooklyn Excelsiors. Now, the Excelsior Club, prior to Crichton, had a record in 1858 of 8-5 and in 1859 of 12-3, which was still a fantastic record. Once Crichton got there, their record almost stayed the same. The Excelsiors themselves did not take on the best competition, and that is part due to their catcher, Joe Leggett. He must have had some kind of a phobia about competition, because if you look at the years I mentioned, 58 and 59, and I only mention those because that's when Crichton started, and then he moved over to the Excelsiors in 1860. Their records are strong, as I said, in 1858, 8-5, due to their competition, which was just not competition at all. The only team that they played, which was a really the strongest team, was the Brooklyn Atlantics that year. They lost both games to them, and they lost the other 3 games to teams that have over 500 records. They did not beat a team that had an over 500 record. That year, after 58, they didn't play the Mutual Club, which was 11-1. They didn't play the Empire Club, which was 9-1-1, or the Expert Club, which was 6-1. The next year, in 59, they had a record of 12-3. Again, this is without Jim Crichton. They lost the opening game. They went on to win 7 in a row, and then they lost to a star club of Brooklyn. And the pitcher in that game was Jim Crichton, and that's probably the first taste that Joe Leggett, who was the captain of the Brooklyn Excelsiors, got a taste of Crichton. I'm sure he knew about him and heard about him. Crichton was certainly the first person to bring speed and accuracy into the pitching of baseball. The following game, the Excelsiors beat the Eagles, the Eagle Club. They were 6-3. It was their first win over a club with an above 500 record in 22 matches dating back to September 28th of 57. So in almost 2 years, they had not beaten a club with an over 500 record. That year, in 59, they failed again to schedule any competition. They didn't play the Experts, who were 10-2, or the Atlantics, who were 11-1. I guess they had enough of them. So Jim Crichton, he starts off with the Niagara of Brooklyn Club, pitches for them in 58, and during the 59 season, he moves to the Star Club. As I said earlier, he beat the Excelsiors, and then in 1860, he turns up for the Excelsior Club. He's probably one of the first players to be paid to play baseball. It's impossible to say that he was the first. However, if you really study box scores from the early 50s and the late 50s and early 1860s, you'll see players moved around much more than you would ever believe. And I am sure others were paid. He certainly was probably the first, one of the first, because he changed pitching due to his speed and accuracy. And he pitched the way pitching is thought of today. He changed speed. He had location. He did everything that the pitchers of that time did not. As opposed to just laying the ball in there, he actually pitched. So he moves to the Brooklyn Excelsiors in 1860, and they probably lose their first game of the season again for the 3rd year in a row. They lost to the Charter Oak Club. The next game, which was against the Charter Oak Club again, he doesn't pitch. Ed Russell, who did most of the pitching the year before in 59, he pitches, and they let Crichton pitch the 8th and 9th innings. He beats his old team, the Star Club. Then they go upstate on a tour of New York, and they play 6 teams, and they simply destroy them. They did the competition anywhere outside of Brooklyn, New York, states in New Jersey to some extent, was not even close. all the competition, everything stemmed from Brooklyn and New York, which today is Manhattan. After returning from upstate, they played the Brooklyn Atlantics, and they beat them with Crichton 23-4. It was probably the best win for Crichton and the Excelsior club, the greatest win for either. They continued down south. They played Maryland, and the team in Philadelphia beat a weak Putnam club. Then they came into their second game with the Atlantics, and Crichton is lifted after 7 innings, and they're losing 15-12. Ed Russell comes in again, holds the Atlantic down, and they lose 15-14. Now, 9 days later, the Excelsiors play the Empire Club, another weak club. Crichton is pulled after 3 innings and allows 7 runs, and the game is called after 4 innings due to rain. The Excelsiors were on top 13-7, but this is the second time now Crichton is asked not to pitch. The third game with the Atlantics is well documented. This it's easily researched. The game was called for 5.5 innings. The Excelsiors were ahead 8-6, but due to fan interference, the game was declared a tie. And the rest of the season, the Excelsiors went out, and they finished the year 18-2-1, and Crichton was 16-2-1 that season. That's the season that everybody says, oh, he's the best pitcher. And he only beat one team with an above 500 record in all those 16 wins. He was pulled from a game once. However, technically it was twice if you look into the Empire game, where he only pitched 3 innings. He allowed about 8.5 runs per game, which is excellent for that time. And he had 17 strikeouts during the 1860 season. That were reported. I can't say that they're always reported in the papers. He did not win a championship. That's one thing he did not do. For all the accolades that he gets, and he certainly deserves a lot of credit for changing how pitching was done and thought of and what a weapon it could be. He deserves most of the credit, but he was not the only one. Now, the person who was, in my estimation, and certainly statistically a better pitcher, was the least known pitcher of the 1860s, a man by the name of Joe Sprague. He was born in Brooklyn, just as Crichton, and he also pitched during the same time that Crichton pitched, and he first appeared in 1857 with the National Club. At age 14, it was a junior club, junior being 16 years or younger. And he pitched for them for 2 seasons, 57 and 58. And in 1859, I cannot find any box scores with his name. I guarantee you he pitched someplace. But in 1860, he pitches for 3 clubs: the National of Brooklyn, the Exercise of Brooklyn, and the Orient of Greenpoint, which is also Brooklyn, North Brooklyn. For a person to pitch for 3 teams in one season, as Crichton had pitched for 2 in one season, he certainly had to be paid, and he had to be good if all these teams are coveting him. Now, in 1861, he's with the Exercise Club. They become a senior club. And the first team he faces is the Eckfords, and he loses 27-20. And it's tied 17 apiece after 6 innings. And this is a formidable Eckford club. This is 1861. They're 1 year away of winning the national championship. The next game, he faces the Atlantic. Very powerful team. He loses there. And then his third game with the Exercise Club, he faces the Eckford, and he loses again. However, that loss on October 1 of 1861 was the last time that Joe Sprague would lose a game that he appeared in. Not only pitched, because he didn't pitch in every game that he appeared in. He would not lose a game until he retired in 1865. He would go on to win 24 straight games as a pitcher and 34 games as a player. So he played in and won 34 games over 4 seasons. Technically, they count the end of the 61 5, but 4 seasons. With the exercise club, which in 61 became a senior club, in 60 they were a junior club, he beat the Woodland Club 23-8, and that's October 9th. And that began his 24-game winning streak over 4 years. On November 4th of the same year, 61, he appears for the Eckfords for the first time. He beats the Hudson Valley Club, the second team in 61. So he was on 3 teams in 60 and 2 teams in 61. That's 5 teams, 4 teams, because exercise was also on 64 teams in 2 years. He is certainly being paid for what he's doing, and he's certainly well wanted. Crichton did not switch teams as much as Sprague did. People may say he had an attitude problem. We don't know that. He certainly, wherever he went, he won, and that's the key. His stint with the Eckfords is in question because it's probably in violation of Rule 27 of the NABBP rules, the 30-day rule. He was not a 30-day member of the Eckfords when he joined them. He was last pitched for the exercise club on October 9th. He appeared on November 4th. That's not 30 days by my count. But I guess the rules weren't enforced as they should be, and he's allowed to pitch. 62 was his first full season with the Eckfords. And I'm in his 24-game winning streak that I've compiled, I'm including intra-squad games only to show that he never lost a game. It didn't matter regular season, who he faced, who he pitched against, what competition. He won 24 times in a row, straight games, any kind. So he pitched 2 inter-squad games, and then on May 22nd of 62, while playing a pickup game, which teams often did in the beginning of the season, many teams would mix guys and just play 2 sides. He played with Jim Crichton on the Charter Oak grounds. He played short. Crichton played second base in that game. He won that game as a player. The only documented time the 2 ever appeared on this field together. When Crichton was with the Excelsior's team, they never, as I said earlier, never played the Eckford. Never. And that's because Leggett, I believe, was afraid of competition. So after this game with Crichton, he pitches and wins an inter-squad game, and then Bill Sprague joins the 13th Regiment New York State Militia for a 3-month stint. And he pitches in a game against the 4th Regiment, and he wins that match. Now, while he's in the Army and the Eckfords are building their team, they split with the Atlantics. They win the first game 20-14, which they had done the previous year, and then lost the next 2. The Atlantics came back and simply destroyed them 39-5 in the second game. Now the third game, which is going to be essentially for the national championship, the Eckfords push it off until Sprague is fit to pitch. So not his first game, because it's documented that Sprague's first game was this match on the September 18th of 62 against the Atlantic. It's not, as I told you, he pitched earlier, late in 61 in November against the Hudson Valley team. This was his first real test in front of 15,000 people. He beats the Atlantics 8-3. It's the lowest run total they've ever encountered in their history. He only allowed 8 hits in that game, and in 7 of those 9 innings, the first 2 Atlantic batters were retired. He was completely dominating, like no other pitcher had dominated the Atlantics at any point. There's nothing they could do against him. And it would be their lowest run total, these 3 runs, even besting Crichton's 3 when he beat them in 1860 until 1869 when they would beat the Mutuals 2-1. So he's held them to 3 runs. Subsequently, with Sprague, the Eckfords win out, and they win the 62 championship and the first Silver Ball championship. Now, I wrote a story about that for McFarland's Baseball 11. Is published last year. I suggest everybody read that. It's specifically about this game on September 18th, where Sprague makes his I guess, competitive debut for the experts. In 63, Sprague and the experts win all 10 games. It's the first time in baseball history a team was undefeated in the season and wins the championship. So the experts have now won 20 straight games, and he's won 16 of them. He then moved on after the second season with the experts and played with the Atlantics in 64 and 5, 9 times in 64, 6 times in 65. Atlantics had a habit of doing that, stealing players from other teams. They weren't the only ones. They were just real good at it. And he actually won 2 more championships with the Atlantics during that period. So he was certainly the catalyst for the 62 and 63 championship that the experts won. He was absolutely the reason, and he was just on the Atlantics when they won 2. So he won 4 in a row. Nobody in the history of early baseball had won 4 championships in a row, and he was on that team. So during his run up until 1865, he pitched and had 24 straight victories. It wasn't until 1888 that Tim Keefe, when he won 19 straight, even came close. But Sprague's 24 wins, as I said, I included some inter-squad games in there. It's still, even though those games that I mentioned were not against competition, he still didn't lose. He didn't lose inter-squad games. He didn't lose games to weak opponents or strong opponents. And as I said, he played in and won 34 straight matches. Now, there's some statistics here that we have of Crichton and Sprague. And Crichton allowed about 8.5 runs a game during the 1860 season, which was still a great season. However, as I said, the competition they played was just not up to par. It wasn't that good. And he had 17 reported strikeouts that year. Now, certainly we're not basing wins, losses, how great someone is on strikeouts. But if you look at Sprague, at the end of 62, those 6 games, and the 10 games in 63, his time with the experts, he won all 16 games. He beat the Atlantics 3 times. They had never, ever, ever been beaten 3 times in a season, ever. And the efforts outscored them 58-24. No one ever did that to the Atlantics. No one ever, wasn't even close. He beat the Mutuals 3 times. And he beat the Unions of Mauriciana 3 times. And they had a pitcher, a fantastic pitcher also named Bernard Hannigan. He was a Crichton, Sprague type pitcher. He just didn't have the support behind him. But he was another fantastic pitcher. So during the 62 and 63 season, Sprague struck out 31 batters, and I'm missing 4 box scores. So he probably could have approached 40 strikeouts during those 16 games, which certainly was unheard of. He won 2 championships, and he did allow 9.25 runs per game. However, the competition he was facing was repeatedly stronger than Crichton's competition. He more often played teams that were 500 or better, and the experts never shied from any challenge. So with this in mind, it's for you to decide, with Sprague winning 24 games as a pitcher, 34 as a player, 2 championships, being on 4 championship teams in a row, was he the best pitcher of the 1860s, or was it Jim Crichton, who certainly gets all of the accolades, all of the media attention? But here's a guy who did nothing but win, and he won often. And that concludes the presentation. I want to let you know that I wrote a story for Baseball 10 on this. It's also by McFarland. It goes into much more depth comparing the 2. but it's certainly well worth looking into. And take anybody's questions, and thank you for your time.
Looks like we do have a caller. Go ahead.
Hey, Eric. This is Matt Brandywine out in California.
Hey, Matt, what's up? How are you?
Hey, I'm doing all right. You did great. My question for you is, at this time, it seems like it's pretty clear that all the pitchers were throwing swiftly and, being, intriguing. My question is, is there any evidence that these guys were able to communicate their pitches with their catchers?
Matt, great question. I just want to tell you that your first statement about pitchers pitching fast, it's very important. And if you read my article about this in Baseball 10, Chadwick was against it. He despised it.
Yeah.
In my estimation, he almost wanted. You might as well have had someone on your team pitch to you. He wanted the ball laid in there. He wanted the defense to decide the game. And John Stevens, who was a pitcher well before Crichton himself, Sprague, Bernard Hannigan, who I mentioned, those guys realized the value of pitching, and I say pitching, I mean in the sense that we think of it as today, not just occupying a position. They weren't just players; they were pitchers. There's a difference. As far as your question about signals, I can tell you this: that when I pitched, I played in over 900 games, won a lot of them, pitched all over the United States. I communicate to my catcher what's coming, because the catcher, I'm going to only talk from my perspective, as the playing perspective. My catcher, when he and I are in a game, we're trying to make as many outs as we can between us, and there certainly is a rhythm and a cadence, and he knows how I pitch, and he's not always right up on the dish. He's back further. And I let him know what I'm throwing, so he knows where to position himself. I'm positioning him. He can't position me because I only have 12 feet long by 3 feet wide to pitch from. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to throw a fastball and then a changeup, he has to know, because I'm throwing off the batter's timing, and he's looking for that tip back or that foul pop around home base. So I am signaling, and I am letting him know what I'm throwing, and I can't imagine that didn't go on back in that time. It only makes sense to me. I have no proof, unfortunately, and the writing, the baseball writing, is certainly not as detailed as it is today. And I don't believe that these writers would even know if that went on. They're reporting on the game, and a lot of these games, the game I mentioned that Sprague played against the Atlantic, so there's 15,000 people. There's so much going on, pickpockets, fights, and things. They're being distracted. There's no way they would know such nuances of a ball game. They're just reporting the lineups, what happened in each inning, and if you look at sometimes two different newspaper reports from the same game, the lineups may be different. So I can't trust that they would have so much in-depth knowledge of the interaction between the pitcher and the catcher.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate it.
Okay, Matt, you're welcome.
Okay, next caller would be Bruce, and then after that, Corky. Go ahead.
Hello, Eric.
Bruce, how are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Love your presentation, by the way. I was curious about one thing. You said that Sprague won 24 in a row as a pitcher and 34 in a row as a player, which implies that for 10 of those games he was not the pitcher.
Right. Yes, I said that he didn't always pitch. He played other positions, as many and most, and you had to back then, right?
Yeah, my curiosity was, what was the runs per game given up by the team when Sprague wasn't the pitcher as compared to when he was the pitcher?
Well, you know what? I that information I don't have, but it could be gotten because I have all the results of the games he played in. I didn't look at it from that standpoint. When I wrote my article and when I found him, I immediately compared him to Jim Crichton because everybody said he was the best. So I looked at the games he played in, and Crichton, he in that 1860 season with the Excelsiors, he pitched except when he got pulled, and then he didn't play. He either pitched or he didn't play. That was it, you know. So it was. I didn't even think to put that information together. However, I can tell you once Sprague got onto the efforts from September 18th on, they never lost a game. So it's you know the 16 straight, and then he even won the next year. Overall, the team won 21 in a row, and he was there for 6 teams. They had won 4 before him, but I don't have that information.
My question goes, of course, to the concept of fielding independent pitching that's so prevalent in Sabre, and the best way to separate the fielding excellence of the team from Sprague's excellence is to compare when he wasn't pitching to when he was pitching. So I think that'd be a really good way to analyze things.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm looking right here at some scores before he got there. Okay, and as I said, he missed the beginning of the season, right? In 62, they let up 20 runs, 29 runs, then 5, 14, 25, 39, 19, 24, and 11. He gets there. It's 3, 14, 10, 8, 2, 13. He didn't pitch this game with a 25. That was the game he set out. And then the next season, I think they only scored. I'm going to quickly look for you. They didn't score over. I don't think anybody got 15 runs on him. I can tell you right now, the highest total he let up in 1860 was 13. So he let up 5, 9, 4, 13, 5, 10, 10, 8, 5, and 10. So with him there, you see the difference. I'm reading the scores. They're always just had 9.25 runs a game. When he's not there and you're letting up 20, 29, 14, they're probably letting up close to 18 runs. But they're still winning. So I don't want to confuse anybody by saying the team wasn't good. As I say in my article in the McFarland book, the team, he made a good team invincible, and Crichton made a good team good. He wasn't a factor in far as in that sense. They didn't do any better with him or without him. With Sprague, the good team became invincible and winning 2 straight championships. Crichton didn't win any championships, none.
Sounds good, Garrick.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. Hope you read the article in McFarland. It's as I said, more in detail than this presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Eric, this is Corky, your second favorite Minnesotan.
Corky, oh my buddy, how are you?
Good. Say,
thank you for the kind post on Facebook. I appreciate it. With the
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Committee.
You're welcome. So, how much of Crichton even being in the conversation is because he died so young and so early in his career? I mean, did he get too much attention because of that, or?
Yeah,
you know,
in my estimation, yes, he was a martyr. And when I started looking into these 2 pitchers, and again, I started with Crichton because when I first got involved in 19th century baseball in 1998, everything I read said Crichton was the best, and the season was fantastic. And then you really look at the season and you break it down, and he's good. There's no doubt about it. He is good, but he's not at the level that people are vaulting him to. It was because that he was probably, as I said, one of the first with speed and accuracy and actually pitched. Although I said John Stevens, I told you, preceded him, he was just straight fastballs. This guy actually pitched, and that's really what changed everything. And he was a pioneer. In this case, the pioneer wasn't the best player, but he was absolutely a pioneer. And I still say that if Chadwick had looked into what he was doing, this is Crichton, and analyzed what he was doing, he would have realized the value of having a pitcher. But Chadwick was so against that he didn't. He plenty of articles say, Crichton is this and that. But again, the teams that they played, they should have beat anyway. They didn't need him to beat those teams because they beat them the previous year. And as I said, that game against the Atlantics, when they won 24-3, that was the greatest victory for Crichton and for the Excelsiors. But that was it. The other teams that they beat, they were not over 500 except that Eagle Club. They were all under 500. Where Sprague is repeatedly beating 500 and above teams. Beat the Atlantic 3 times. So I read the stat. He scored them 58 to 28. It's not even close. He destroyed the Atlantics. Something that Crichton, he did one game, the 23-4 game. But after that, that was it. He couldn't touch him. Sprague, I compared him to Crichton because I was told he was the best, and it's incomplete research that has, in today's discussions, has put Crichton where he is. It's so easy now to go back and to look. Back in the 1860s, they don't have the records they have today. We can go back and see multiple newspapers and read multiple accounts and compare and find, as I found that game that he got pulled in, and see, wow, it's really not that impressive. Where Sprague, he just didn't lose, and there's no getting around it. All that information is out there. It's nothing that I made up. It all can be researched. He won all those games in a row, whether he's a player or a pitcher. He didn't lose, and I don't see how back then they didn't see how good he was. But I guess they were so caught up in Crichton being the pioneer that they just assumed he was the best. But in this case, he was absolutely a pioneer, but he was not the best.
All right, Eric, I'm going to jump in at this point. You may not be aware of it, but Leslie was not able to do her presentation earlier due to some technical difficulties. So we have her queued up. Yep. So
okay.
She is on deck, and at this point, I think I'd like to move forward so that Leslie can get her presentation in.
Certainly, Kelly, thank you very much. Thank you for all the vintage baseball players and enthusiasts out there for tuning into this event.
Leslie, you can go ahead.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me this time?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. And you're going to put up my PowerPoint for me, right?
Yep, it's already up.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
I'm not seeing it, so that's why okay. I'm still seeing the previous presentation.
Yeah, you might have a bit of a delay. So.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, I just wanted, got it. All right. Well, thanks everybody for sticking around. I really appreciate it. I apologize for the need to make you stick around for another half hour, but I do appreciate it. And I wanted to say thank you to everybody for, it's been very interesting as I've listened to the presentations today. And so my goal in the next 20 minutes is simply to give you an introduction to a topic that a lot of people don't typically know a great deal about. And I think that's my overall message, is really it's a history that there's more to it than people know. A lot of people today tend to think about women's baseball as something, it's associated with the 1940s and 50s, the All-American League, or current present-day baseball, right? As if this is all something new. And Deb Shattuck actually makes this argument really well if you want to read a great book called Bloomer Girls, where she argues that it's really now women returning to the game because they've always been there as fans, as players. And today we're going to focus primarily on the issue of players. But, for example, she points out in another article she wrote that there are over 60 teams that have been identified playing in just New York State alone between the 1850s and the end of the century. So one state, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And so the real question becomes, why don't we know about it? What are some of the issues? And as a historian, I always look at context, right? And so part of it is simply the attitude of the 19th century towards women participating in anything strenuous, and seeing it not as something women were supposed to do. But baseball falls into a special category because it was a very manly sport. And so the idea that women were going to participate in that, certainly not something that most people saw as something women should be doing. Bigger issue is, of course, you have to know what you're looking for when you go back into the 19th century. It's interesting to look at the different names that teams were given. Reds and blues, blondes and brunettes. The advertisement that you're looking at says Boomer Girls. That's actually the most well-known name that most people would associate. There's also college teams, and there are individuals who are going to play on men's teams. Harper's Weekly in 1859 starts out with one of the first mentions of both genders playing baseball. The Philadelphia Age in 1865 talks about a ladies' baseball club, and the list goes on. The other issue, of course, is this question of looking back, and some people, a lot of it because of the newspapers and the newspaper coverage, see 19th century women's baseball as really not serious, as more entertainment, as more vaudevillian, just for fun, ridiculous spectacle, that kind of thing, and not really recognizing that there were really two aspects of women's baseball. There certainly was that vaudevillian element, as we're going to see, but there was also this sense that there were honest to goodness good ball players out there, and they played some decent baseball. But on the entertainment side of it, just to give you a couple of examples, New York Times, August of 1883, published an article entitled "A Ridiculous Exhibition," talking about a women's baseball game. A month later, in September of 83, they published another one called "A Baseball Burlesque." And think about that language, right? And so, hard to see that any differently. If we could move to the next slide, that would be great, because we're going to look at one of the challenges to that idea, which is certainly the notion of the college teams. Okay, I'm not sure what happened to my slide presentation. It seems to have gone away, but I can continue to talk about it. We're talking about the college team, which is the Vassar Resolutes. The Vassar Resolutes is a team that looks at the idea of playing for college, playing